What happens when the world tells you that you're not enough? When a man who has everything tries to break you with his words. Zara was just a girl with dreams until Luca, a man with power, made it his mission to crush them. But Zara isn't one to be easily silenced. In a battle where identity, race, and self-worth collide, the question remains, can she turn the tables and reclaim her light before it's too late? The silence in the gallery was suffocating. The crisp hum of the air conditioning and the soft rustle of footsteps echoed off the whitewashed walls, where paintings and sculptures stood frozen in time. Zara stood behind the reception desk, her fingers grazing the edge of a well-worn sketchbook. The gallery was empty, save for a few art enthusiasts browsing the exhibits, lost in their own worlds. But Zara's mind wasn't on them. She stared at her latest charcoal drawing, its stark black and white contrast capturing the raw emotion she had poured into it. The deep lines etched into the paper seemed to breathe with her every heartbeat. It was a self-portrait, one she'd begun weeks ago, and yet every time she looked at it, she saw something new, something hidden, something that she wasn't ready to acknowledge yet. "Excuse me, miss. Can you direct me to the nearest restroom?" A voice pulled Zara from her thoughts, snapping her back into the present. She looked up, her gaze meeting that of a tall man entering the gallery. His crisp suit, expensive cologne, and confident stride set him apart from the usual crowd. Luca Drake. She'd heard his name before. Whispers of his reputation echoed throughout the art world. He was a man who considered himself a critic, a patron, and a destroyer of art. Zara nodded, gesturing towards the hallway to her left. Down the hall, to the right. Luca offered her a polite smile, but there was something in his eyes, something that made her skin crawl. As he passed her, his gaze lingered a moment too long, and Zara felt an uncomfortable shiver run down her spine. For a moment, she forgot all about the patrons and the art in the room. It was just the two of them, Zara and Luca. She could sense the weight of his gaze, like a predator sizing up its prey. She wasn't sure why, but in that moment, Zara knew. Tonight was different. Tonight, this man would target her. Luca returned minutes later, walking with the slow, deliberate pace of a man who had nowhere to be. His eyes darted across the art in the room, pausing here and there to inspect the works with a smug expression. Zara tried to focus on her duties, but she couldn't ignore the discomfort gnawing at her. Every step he took seemed to close the distance between them. He stopped in front of a large abstract painting, his lips curling into a smile. "Tell me," he said loudly, clearly speaking to no one in particular, "who buys this nonsense?" It's like a child threw paint at a canvas. His voice was like the crack of a whip, and the few patrons in the room shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other. Zara kept her gaze fixed on her desk, pretending not to hear. She'd seen this act before. Critics with too much money and not enough taste. They loved to tear down the works of those they couldn't understand. "Is that your work?" Luca's voice cut through her thoughts. Zara looked up, her expression neutral. He was standing in front of her desk now, his eyes gleaming with challenge. "Excuse me," she replied, trying to maintain her composure. "The drawing," Luca said, his finger pointing at the charcoal sketch on her desk. "You really think this thing belongs here?" A cold rush of anger surged through Zara, but she forced herself to breathe. "That is my work," she said, her voice steady. Luca chuckled, clearly amused. "Really? How charming." The receptionist moonlights as an artist. His tone dripped with mockery. "What's it supposed to be, then?" A self-portrait of a woman in misery. Zara's heart pounded in her chest. She had heard it all before. People like him saw only the surface, the outward expression of art, never the emotions, the struggle, the stories that lay beneath. They reduced it all to a caricature, a joke. But tonight, she would not retreat. Tonight, she would not be silent. "It's a reflection," Zara said quietly, her voice firm. "A reflection of me. My struggles. My truths." Luca raised an eyebrow. "Struggles? You." He let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Is that the charm you think is going to get you anywhere in this world?" A pretty girl with a sad little drawing? Let me tell you something, sweetheart, he said, his voice dropping into a low, menacing tone. This is not art. This is just sadness paraded as a masterpiece. Zara's pulse quickened, but she held her ground. She didn't look away, didn't shrink back. This was her moment. No longer would she stand in the shadows of others' opinions. The art is not in the way it looks, Luca, she said, her voice gaining strength. It's in the way it makes you feel. It's in the truth it reveals about you. Your discomfort means something. For a moment, Luca faltered. His confident smirk slipped just slightly, but only for a fraction of a second. Zara could see it, the slightest crack in his armor. But just as quickly, he recovered. How cute. You're an artist now, too. You're a receptionist, miss. And that's all you'll ever be, Luca said, his voice dripping with scorn. Zara inhaled deeply. She would not let him define her. She was not just a receptionist. She was an artist, a creator, a storyteller through her charcoal strokes. And she would prove him wrong. Goodbye, Luca, she said coolly, turning away from him. If you don't see the art in it, that's not my problem. As Luca walked off, Zara's hands trembled. His words lingered in her mind, threatening to invade her thoughts. The silence in the gallery grew thicker, but Zara's heart was pounding in her ears. The storm inside her had only just begun. Minutes passed, and the gallery filled with more patrons. Yet Zara could barely focus on the work in front of her. She kept stealing glances at Luca, who had moved to another part of the gallery. His voice cut through the crowd now, louder than before. He was criticizing the work of other artists, his words sharp and condescending. But it wasn't the art he was attacking, it was them. The people, the talent, the souls behind the creations. And it made Zara sick. A decision began to form within her, slow at first, then gathering speed. She couldn't let him keep getting away with this. She couldn't let him trample over her passion without consequence. She had a talent, a voice that needed to be heard. Tonight, she would show him. She rose from her desk and made her way to the storage room at the back of the gallery. It was time. Zara's hands trembled as she walked towards the storage room, her pulse quickening with each step. The soft hum of the gallery's atmosphere seemed to amplify the sound of her heart, as if the building itself was aware of the internal storm brewing inside her. She had spent years hiding behind her role as a receptionist, as a wallflower in a world full of talent and prestige. But tonight, something shifted. Tonight, the walls she built around herself were crumbling, and she could feel a new power coursing through her veins. The storage room had always been her sanctuary. It was small, unremarkable, and cluttered with unused supplies, but to her, it was a refuge, a place where she could escape the expectations of others and find solace in her art. No one had ever seen her work in its purest form, at least no one except for herself. But tonight, things were different. Tonight she was going to show the world, show Luca exactly who she was. As she pushed the door open, the faint smell of dust and old paint greeted her. The room was dimly lit by a single hanging light bulb, casting long shadows across the cluttered space. Zara's eyes scanned the area, her gaze falling on the blank canvases leaning against the walls, waiting to be filled. She pulled one forward, feeling its weight in her hands, the texture of the fabric reassuring her that she could create something that would finally speak for her. With a sharp inhale, she set the canvas on the easel and began to gather her supplies. Charcoal, pastels, brushes, paints. Each material was a tool, but it was more than that. It was a means of expressing everything she had kept buried for so long. The self-doubt, the fear, the anger, the shame. She was going to pour it all out. And maybe, just maybe, by the end of it, she'd finally be able to let go of the years of holding herself back. Her mind raced, replaying Luca's words over and over again. His laughter, his mocking tone, a sad little drawing. Those words stung, but they also ignited a fire inside her. He thought he could reduce her to nothing, dismiss her art with a few cutting remarks. But he was wrong. He didn't know the first thing about her. He didn't understand the depth of her pain, her struggle, her resilience. Zara took a deep breath and began to sketch, her fingers moving fluidly across the canvas. The charcoal made quick, sweeping lines, outlining the form of a woman standing tall against a turbulent sky. There was strength in her posture, a quiet defiance that Zara had always admired in others but never truly recognized in herself. But now it was there. She could see it, feel it, like an invisible force rising within her. The woman on the canvas was more than just an image. She was Zara. But she wasn't just Zara in the present. She was Zara in every moment she had ever felt small, every time she had been underestimated or belittled, every time she had been forced to shrink herself to fit the mold others had made for her. This woman, this image, was her redemption, her way of claiming her space in a world that had always tried to silence her. As the charcoal lines took shape, Zara's thoughts turned inward. She thought about her childhood, about the years of doubt and insecurity that had shaped her. She thought about the times when her talent had been ignored or mocked. But more than anything, she thought about the people who had supported her, the ones who had believed in her even when she couldn't believe in herself. They had seen her for who she truly was, an artist, not just a woman behind a desk. Her fingers moved faster now, the strokes becoming more confident as the image of the woman began to take form. She could feel the emotions flooding through her anger and pain transforming into something beautiful, something raw and powerful. This wasn't just about art. This was about reclaiming her narrative, rewriting the story that others had tried to impose on her. The silence of the room was deafening, but Zara felt a sense of peace within it. The weight of the world seemed to fall away with each brushstroke, each line she added to the canvas. Time no longer mattered. It was just her and the art, creating something from the depths of her soul. As she added the final touches to the woman's face, Zara allowed herself to step back and look at the image she had created. The woman's expression was fierce, but there was a quiet sadness in her eyes, a reflection of Zara's own pain, her own battle. But it was not a weakness. It was strength. The strength to stand in the face of everything that tried to tear her down and say, "I am still here." Zara stood there for a long moment, her breath shallow, as if she had just completed a monumental task. In many ways, she had. This was her truth, her art. It was everything she had ever wanted to say, all wrapped up in one image. And now, for the first time in years, she was ready to share it. But then, the door creaked open, and Zara's heart skipped a beat. She turned to see Luca standing in the doorway, his silhouette framed by the dim light from the hallway. His presence was like a shadow in the room, his expression unreadable as his eyes scanned the space. Well, Luca said, his voice dripping with disdain. "What do we have here? Still trying to play artist?" Zara's stomach twisted, but she refused to let her nerves show. She wasn't going to let him ruin this moment. She wasn't going to let him make her feel small again. She swallowed hard, her voice calm and steady as she responded, "I'm not playing anything. This is who I am." Luca stepped into the room, his eyes falling on the canvas. His expression shifted, but it wasn't surprise. It was a cold, calculated look, as if he were inspecting something beneath his notice. His gaze flicked back to Zara, his lips curling into a sneer. "Not bad," he said, his voice dismissive, "but still a little too dramatic, don't you think?" Zara's heart thudded in her chest, but she didn't flinch. She took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Art isn't about being pretty. It's about truth. The truth you refuse to see. Luca's smile faltered, but he quickly regained his composure. He walked closer to the canvas, his fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the painting. "Truth, huh? Well, I'll give you this. You've got guts. But you'll never make it in the art world with this emotion-filled mess. People like me, people who matter, we see right through it." Zara clenched her fist, her anger rising, but she didn't allow him to see it. "You know what, Luca," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "I don't need people like you to validate me. I'm not here to impress you. This is for me. It always has been." Luca's face darkened, but he didn't respond. Instead, he turned away, walking out of the room with the same arrogance that had made her feel so small in the past. But this time, Zara stood her ground. As the door closed behind him, Zara let out a long breath, her body shaking with a mix of relief and adrenaline. She had done it. She had stood up for herself. She had shown Luca who she was. And for the first time, she didn't feel like she had to hide. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. But Zara was no longer the woman who had hidden in the background. She was an artist, and her journey was just beginning. The weeks following the gallery event were a blur. Zara's life had been consumed by an insatiable desire to prove herself, to validate her place in a world that seemed determined to ignore her. Her work had started to gain attention, though not in the way she had hoped. She'd never expected things to change overnight, but she had also never imagined that they would remain this stagnant, this painfully slow. Every day at the gallery felt like a battle. The harsh whispers from the other employees, the thinly veiled dismissals, the polite but hollow compliments. It was all becoming too much. Yet there was a fire inside her that refused to die, even in the face of it all. Zara spent every free moment in the storage room, her sanctuary. The canvas had become her canvas again, her therapy, and it had started to consume her. The charcoal and pastels, the paintbrushes, the oils, they were no longer just tools. They had become her voice. Each line she drew on the canvas felt like a word she had never spoken. Each stroke an emotion she had never shared. Art was no longer just about beauty. It was about survival. But even in the privacy of the storage room, even surrounded by the work that brought her a sense of peace, she couldn't escape the shadow of Luca. His words haunted her every move, his sneer echoing in her mind like a broken record. You'll never make it. People like me, people who matter, we see right through it. She had wanted to prove him wrong. But how could she when he seemed so untouchable, so sure of himself? The truth was, Zara was exhausted. Physically, emotionally, mentally. She had poured everything into her work, into proving to herself that she was more than just a receptionist, more than just a shadow in the background. But the weight of it was starting to take its toll. Her shoulders were always tense, her mind always racing, her body always fatigued. One afternoon, after a long day of staring at the same canvas without making any progress, Zara found herself sitting on the floor of the storage room, her knees pulled to her chest, her head buried in her hands. She had tried to tell herself that she was doing this for her, that it wasn't about Luca or anyone else. But the truth was, she felt stuck. She wasn't sure who she was doing this for anymore. A soft knock at the door broke her from her thoughts. She looked up, startled, her heart skipping a beat. Zara. It was Amara's voice. Zara stood quickly, wiping her eyes and attempting to compose herself. She wasn't ready to face anyone, least of all Amara. But the knock came again, more insistent this time. Zara, I know you're in there. I've been trying to reach you. Can we talk? Reluctantly, Zara opened the door, letting Amara step inside. The woman's eyes immediately softened when she saw Zara's disheveled state, the exhaustion that had taken root in her features. Amara was always a source of calm, a steady presence in Zara's chaotic world. I've been worried about you, Amara said gently, sitting down beside Zara. You've been disappearing into this room every chance you get. You're not answering your phone. What's going on? Zara didn't know where to start. The weight of everything, the gallery, Luca, the pressure to succeed seemed impossible to articulate. She felt foolish even trying to explain it. So instead, she shrugged, avoiding Amara's gaze. I'm trying to figure things out. Amara studied her for a moment before speaking again, her tone soft yet firm. You don't have to do this alone. You don't have to carry all of this weight by yourself. I get that you want to prove yourself, but pushing everyone away is not the answer. Zara's chest tightened. I'm not pushing anyone away, she snapped, then immediately regretted the harshness in her voice. I just don't know what to do anymore. It's like nothing's working. I'm stuck in this never-ending cycle of trying and failing and trying again. Amara was silent for a moment, letting the weight of Zara's words settle in the room. Then, she reached out and placed a hand on Zara's arm. "Let me remind you of something," she said, her voice gentle but strong. "You're not failing, and you're definitely not alone. I've seen you work. I've seen your passion. You're creating things that matter. They might not be on the walls of the gallery yet, but that doesn't mean they aren't valuable. It just means it's not your time yet." Zara looked up at her, tears welling in her eyes. "But Luca, he's right. I'll never be enough. Not in that world." Amara's face hardened. "Luca is a joke. He doesn't define your worth, Zara. You define it. Don't let someone else's narrow view of the world make you question your talent. The world will catch up eventually. But you have to keep moving forward, even when it feels impossible." Zara sat in silence, Amara's words slowly sinking in. She had heard similar sentiments before, but this time it felt different. Amara wasn't just comforting her. She was challenging her. The truth was, Zara had always been afraid of failure, afraid of reaching for something bigger, only to fall short. But maybe, just maybe, she needed to embrace that fear. "I don't know if I can keep doing this," Zara whispered. "It's too hard." Amara shook her head. "That's exactly why you have to. Don't give up now. If you stop now, you're letting Luca win. You're letting him dictate your path. But you're stronger than that, Zara. You've been stronger than that all along." For the first time in what felt like weeks, Zara allowed herself to believe in the possibility of something more. She had spent so long hiding from the truth, from the pain, from the risk of failure. But now, with Amara's encouragement, she began to see a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't about achieving perfection. Maybe it was about being brave enough to try, even when the odds were stacked against her. Zara stood up slowly, wiping her eyes and drawing in a steadying breath. "Okay," she said, her voice shaky but resolute. "I'm going to do it. I'm going to keep going." Amara smiled, her eyes filled with pride. "That's what I wanted to hear. Now let's go. The world needs to see what you can do." Zara nodded, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, she felt like she was on the verge of something. She didn't know what that something was yet, but she was willing to find out. The days after Zara's conversation with Amara passed in a haze of focus and determination. Though her life had felt like it was stuck in a rut, her new resolve made her feel like she was moving forward, even when the gallery's environment felt like quicksand. With each passing hour, she poured herself deeper into her work, painting, sketching, exploring new techniques. She found solace in the quiet hum of the gallery when no one was around. The hum of the lights, the stillness of the walls, they were the only things that didn't judge her. But the stillness didn't last long. It was an early Friday morning when Zara felt the shift. She had just finished another piece, a large oil painting of a woman standing tall against a storm, her back turned toward a roaring sea. It was a piece she felt proud of, one that conveyed strength and vulnerability in equal measure. Zara had always known that her art would be her voice, and it was pieces like this one that reminded her of that truth. Yet as she stood back to admire her work, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the corridor. She turned to see Luca, his figure appearing in the doorway like an ominous shadow. His cold eyes skimmed over the painting, and a smirk began to form on his lips. "Another one," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "You think these are going to impress anyone?" Zara's stomach clenched. She had hoped to avoid him today. She wasn't in the mood for his belittling words. But she stood her ground, refusing to let him see how much his words still stung. "Maybe not you," she replied, her voice firmer than she felt. "But this is my work. I'm not creating it for your approval." Luca's smirk deepened and he stepped fully into the room, his presence suddenly filling the space with tension. He circled the painting, examining it from different angles, his gaze calculating. "You think you're special?" he asked, turning back to face her. His eyes narrowed. "What do you know about real art? People like you don't belong in places like this." Zara's hands balled into fists at her sides, but she refused to be intimidated. The sting of his words no longer had the same bite. Not today. Today, she was different. She could feel it in the air. You know, Luca continued, his voice low and taunting, I've been in this business a long time. I've seen a lot of people try to make it. Most of them fail. And I'm pretty sure you will, too. You're just another one of those dreamers who thinks their art means something when it really doesn't. For a moment, Zara was silent. She could feel the weight of his words pressing down on her. For years, she had internalized every insult, every cruel remark. But something in her snapped. This time, she wasn't going to let him win. You're wrong, she said, her voice trembling at first but gaining strength as she spoke. I'm not here to make you or anyone else happy. I'm here for myself. And you may not like it, but that doesn't change anything. Luca's expression flickered with annoyance. He took a step closer to her, looming over her, his gaze hard. Don't forget who you're talking to. You're just a temporary fixture here, Zara. You don't belong. And you certainly don't have the talent to back up whatever delusion you're holding on to. Zara stood tall. The fire within her, which had once been a flickering ember, was now a blaze of defiance. You think you're the only one with power in this place? Well, I'm done with letting people like you dictate my worth. The words hit him harder than she expected. His jaw clenched, his eyes narrowing, but he didn't speak for a long moment. Zara stood, waiting for him to say something, anything. But he just turned on his heel and walked toward the door. You'll regret this, he said over his shoulder, his voice cold. You're nothing without people like me. Zara didn't flinch. She didn't let his words land. Instead, she watched him walk out the door, the sound of his footsteps growing fainter as he left the room. And then she exhaled, a long breath she hadn't realized she had been holding. That night, after the gallery had closed, Zara found herself in the storage room once again, the solitude wrapping around her like a comforting blanket. She stared at her latest painting, the woman standing strong against the storm, the tumultuous sea swirling beneath her feet. She wasn't going to let Luca define her. Not anymore. The work she had done, the work she was still doing, it had meaning. She had to believe that. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on the door. Zara! Amara's voice called out. You here? Zara stood up and opened the door, her heart lifting a little when she saw her friend. Hey, Amara said with a smile. How are you holding up? Zara shrugged, her eyes flicking to the painting. I'm getting there. Slowly, Amara walked into the room, glancing at the artwork. This is amazing, she said, her voice full of awe. You've outdone yourself. Zara smiled, feeling a sense of pride in her chest. Thanks, Amara. I've been working hard. But Luca was here earlier. He said some things. Amara's face darkened at the mention of Luca's name. That guy is such a jerk, she muttered. I don't get why he feels the need to tear everyone down. You're so much better than he'll ever be. Zara nodded, the weight of the earlier confrontation still lingering in her chest. I don't know why I let him get to me, but I'm done with it. I can't let his words control me anymore. Amara smiled warmly. That's the spirit. You're stronger than you think, Zara. I've seen it in you all along. You're not some helpless girl who needs validation from a guy like Luca. You're an artist. And that's something no one can take away from you. Zara's heart swelled at Amara's words. It was the encouragement she needed, the validation she had been craving for so long, but had been too afraid to ask for. Thank you, Zara whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Amara reached out and squeezed Zara's hand. Always. Now let's get you out of here. You deserve a break. We'll grab dinner, just the two of us. Sound good? Zara smiled, the weight on her shoulders feeling a little lighter. Yeah, that sounds perfect. As she closed the door to the storage room behind her, Zara couldn't help but feel like something had shifted. Maybe it was the defeat of Luca's cruel words. Maybe it was the quiet, unwavering support of Amara. Whatever it was, Zara knew one thing for sure. She was no longer the girl who let others define her. She was an artist, and she was just getting started. Zara walked through the quiet streets, the cool evening air brushing against her face. The city lights glittered around her, offering an almost surreal sense of calm. Her conversation with Amara had left her feeling lighter, as though a burden she hadn't realized she was carrying had been lifted, even if just a little. Dinner at the small restaurant had been exactly what she needed. A break from the noise and negativity of the gallery. A chance to sit back and just be. The simple act of sharing a meal with a friend had brought a sense of normalcy to her chaotic world. But Zara knew deep down that things were far from over. Luca had barely left her thoughts since their encounter. His words had been cruel, but they didn't have the same sting they once had. They were like an annoying hum in the back of her mind, a nuisance, but nothing more. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that the encounter was just the beginning. Luca had a way of pushing boundaries, of forcing people into corners, and Zara knew from experience that cornered people were capable of anything. But she also knew she had something Luca didn't. Her art. She reached her apartment, the building standing tall against the night sky, and made her way up to her floor. As she unlocked her door, she saw something out of the corner of her eye, a shadow moving across the hallway. Zara froze, her heart skipping a beat. Her pulse quickened as she turned her head, but there was no one there. Just the empty hallway, lit by the dim glow of the overhead lights. Maybe it was just her imagination, or perhaps the stress of the day was playing tricks on her. She shrugged it off and entered her apartment, locking the door behind her. The stillness of the room greeted her, and she made her way to the couch, collapsing into its cushions with a sigh. But as soon as she settled, her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Zara picked it up, heart sinking when she saw the name on the screen. Luca. She hesitated, staring at the text message for a moment before finally opening it. You can't run from me forever, Zara. I'll make sure everyone knows who you really are. This game is far from over. Her breath caught in her throat. The words were a threat, but more than that, they were a warning. Luca had made it clear he wasn't going to let her go easily, that he was willing to do whatever it took to bring her down. Zara clenched her jaw, her fingers gripping the phone so tightly that her knuckles turned white. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, the moment when her strength and resolve would truly be tested. The old Zara, timid, unsure, and afraid of conflict, would have crumbled under this pressure. She would have apologized, backed down, and let Luca have his way. But the new Zara, the one who had started fighting for her voice and her art, she wasn't going to let anyone silence her again. Taking a deep breath, Zara tapped out a response. Do your worst, Luca. I'm not afraid of you anymore.